Perks, trinkets, items, mutations, whatever you call them, they're part of what makes roguelikes so fun, and roguelites if you want to be that guy. They're upgrades for your character that fundamentally change how they function and can greatly alter the strategies you need to use as a player in order to continue progressing. In one of my previous devlogs on my game, The Last Flower, I talked about the perk system that's been in the game for a while. It's basically copy-pasted from a tutorial, except I made it so that you can get a random perk from a vending machine thing. So at any point in time, you could pay to get a random perk and it would auto-add to your perk list. There were a few problems with this system. The first one was that you didn't have any choice in what perk you got. With the perk being random every time, you would have to hope you got something you liked and that didn't conflict with your playstyle. The second problem is that I also needed to put a limit on the number of perks you could take to prevent getting overpowered, and doing that when you can't choose what perks you take feels terrible. The third problem is that if you could buy a perk at any time, you were basically only limited by the amount of money you had at any point, and that really broke the flow of the game. I'm rich! So in order to fix this, I decided to remove the vending machine concept entirely, and instead make it a bit closer to how Nuclear Throne or Super Raft Boat does things, giving the player a few different perks to choose from, all of which are chosen at random from a pool of available perks. When I tried to implement this, it really didn't go well. I spent several days, if not an entire week, just trying to wrangle this system to do what I wanted it to do. It was getting progressively more and more out of hand as the days went on, and it was becoming clearer and clearer that I needed to rework the system. Normally my instinct is not to try to rework things. If it works, and that's all that matters for shipping the game. It's advice I've heard from countless developers over the years. If you want to ship, you have to be okay with things not being perfect and just ship it if it works. But in this case, I think I took that a bit too far. I was trying to force a system to do something that it wasn't really built to do, and I ended up realizing that I needed to just rework the system into something better entirely. Previously, my proficiency in Unity was too low for me to really create a system like that from scratch without the help of a tutorial, and a lot of tutorials were confusing to me for a system of this size. So when I decided I was going to rework the system, I quickly realized that my comfort with Unity had improved to the point that I was able to figure out exactly how to build the system I needed. Another tutorial. Except not really. I was actually able to map out a system that would do exactly what I wanted it to do. Instead of the complicated enum system that I had before that was spread out across like 4 different scripts, I instead built a system that used scriptable objects and only used a couple smaller scripts with less interdependencies. Let me break it down a bit. So the first thing that this system needs is scriptable objects. For those who aren't familiar, scriptable objects are basically just custom objects that you can make in Unity. You can set them up as their own thing under the Create menu, and essentially the way they work from the script here is that they inherit from scriptable object instead of mono behavior. You can set them up with whatever variables you want. In my case, each of the perks have a name, description, ID number, sprite, and a cost, which is then used. The advantage of this is that it lets me create as many perks that I want as their own separate objects, and I can make as many or as few as I'd like without having to directly edit any more scripts. The second thing the system uses is these 3 empty game objects. All 3 of these objects are inactive until a wave is cleared and the perk phase is entered, and once the wave ends and the perk phase starts, another script will randomly select 3 numbers, each of them having to be different from each other and having to be in the pool of available perks, which right now just means that the player doesn't have them. After those 3 random numbers are selected, another script takes in those random numbers and translates them to perks that correlate with the ID. So for example, if it returned a 2 for perk object 1, then it would choose the second scriptable object here, which is fire rate up. The perk phase then lasts until the player chooses one of the 3 available perks, and once they do, the phase ends and then they move on to the next wave. Whew, that was a lot. Well, if you sat through all of that and are still watching, here's your reward. More art! If you remember from one of the previous devlogs, I mentioned that the world was overrun by fungal monsters. Well, this is the first of its kind, Gluttony. Gluttony is a big, lumbering blue mushroom monster with a giant mouth and tongue, but no eyes. It walks by sort of waddling, and it attacks by lashing its tongue out at its target. It always moves toward the flower and will ignore anything else, including the player. Quite the one-track mind. Adding in Gluttony also gave me a good chance to add in this white flash whenever something takes damage, including enemies, the player, and the flower. This is surprisingly annoying to do in Unity. As a game maker boy, I'm used to being able to turn the sprite's color white for a few frames, then change it back to the default. In Unity, however, the default color for all sprites already is white, so instead of changing the color, you have to change the material to a completely different material that has its color set to white in order to actually make the sprite turn completely white. It works exactly how I need it to, but it's a little annoying that it feels slightly more convoluted than what I would have expected. Lastly, I added a weapon and ammo sprites for the player. Going the gun route felt a bit boring to me, so I instead opted for something a bit more thematically appropriate. In this weird thing called the real world, fungus is treated with fungicide. I figured that using fungicide to kill the mushrooms made a lot more sense and seemed more interesting than just using another gun. I took some inspiration from these backpack sprayers and made this sprayer. It's gun-like enough that you can understand visually that it's meant to be a weapon, but I think it's much more fitting than a real gun. The ammo are these capsules of fungicide. The thought process here was that I still needed something that was bullet-like if the game was going to work, but still wanted something thematically appropriate. It's not really obvious what they are by looking at them, so I think I either need some backstory explanation in the release version of the game, or I need to rework the sprite a bit. Either way, it's a hell of a lot better than a red square. And that's going to be it for this devlog. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit the like button, it really helps. If you'd like to see more devlogs in the future, then be sure to subscribe. I'm Tyler Haddad, thank you so much for watching.